So now that we're done with the Babylonian War, we're gonna be moving on to the war of the I was about to say fourth coalition. I mean the fourth Diadochi War. And I know that he made the Battle of Rhodes and Ipsus their own videos, but since they fall into the fourth war, I'm going to just watch all three segments as one and upload this as the fourth Diadochi coverage of all of it. And so yeah, let's get to it, shall we?
The liberty of the Greek polis was at stake, and without surviving heirs to Alexander, the battle was now a free-for-all deathmatch. The battle to come will be the bloodiest and most chaotic of all. Antigonos and Demetrios were keen to reassert their geopolitical dominance as well as their reputation after their defeat by Seleucus in the Babylonian War, and the renewed alliances amongst the other Diadochi that we covered in the previous episode were the perfect opportunity to achieve this. Thus, they preemptively invaded Greece, taking advantage of the ongoing anti-Macedonian discontent among the Greek polis. Antigonos was acting both for geopolitical reasons and out of a distinctly Macedonian way of conducting war and politics. In a Macedonian martial society that honors strength, militarism, and conquest, Antigonos could not afford to appear weak, and asserting control over Greece was the perfect means to achieve this while weakening Cassander. For their part, Ptolemy and Cassander also had hoped that their support of Seleucus would have the same effect Antigonos was now aiming for against them in Greece. If Seleucus had managed to weaken Antigonos, they could both do overtures and organize against him while he was weak. Thus, the invasion of Greece was both reactive against the other Diadochi and their own attempts to weaken Antigonos, and proactive in achieving a foothold in Hellas. It is also important to understand the state of the empire at the start of the Fourth War, because it determines how the major geopolitical players operate. We cannot know if any of these generals cared about Alexander's legacy until they found out all of his heirs were murdered, except for Cassander, who was perfectly happy murdering most of them. However, by this point it was obvious that the empire was not going to be reunified in Alexander's name, so someone like Antigonos could take his place. Lysimachos, Ptolemy, and Cassander seem to have preferred to have spheres of influence, and perhaps in the case of the first two, enlarging them as much as possible in Asia Minor and Syria respectively. Seleucus probably had ambitions similar to Antigonos as early as now, as he was claiming dream connections to Alexander. Using Alexander's myth would become a major theme in most Hellenistic dynasties, and this was the stage when the Hellenistic kings put themselves at the forefront of it, claiming divine descent and legitimacy from Alexander in order to legitimize their divine rights to rule. Thus, the motivations of each Diadochos, as well as the state of the heirs to Alexander's throne by the start of the Fourth War, meant that the empire was consigned to division and to the conflict that ensued. After his quick success in Athens, the young Demetrios now tried to champion himself as a liberator of Hellas. He used this propaganda strategy to gain favor with the various anti-Macedonian movements in southern Greece. This quickly bore him positive results in the city of Megara. There, the democratic faction sided with him, and this gave him the ability to take over the city and proclaim its freedom, as he had done in Athens. Demetrios also conducted a successful siege in Munichia, where the Democrats fought the 30 tyrants in the aftermath of our Peloponnesian Wars series. This siege was a testing ground for some of his most famous later achievements, but we know almost nothing about it. The consolidation in Attica was a stunning victory for the Antigonids, as they now had a foothold in Greece. Thereafter, the Athenians reconstructed their navy, which was now a loyal ally of the newly deified Antigonid general. Meanwhile, Antigonos' enemy Cassander scrambled with his troops to crush upstart polis that began joining the enemy, for he now had to ensure Greece was under his control before striking back at Antigonos. Having achieved some success in Greece, the Antigonids were finally capable of dealing with the southern front and the scheming Ptolemy. The main target was to be the crossroads of three continents, the island of Cyprus, which was probably the most prized possession of the Egyptian Greek kingdom. Demetrios set sail, while his allies began their fight against Cassander and passed through Rhodes, a well-known shipbuilding hub. He asked for their help, but the Rhodians refused, claiming they preferred their neutrality. Thus, Demetrios began his journey toward the island of Aphrodite with only the might of the Antigonid navy on his side. The importance of Cyprus cannot be overstated. It was a springboard into Asia Minor or Egypt due to its location, and was also a key location for naval raids elsewhere. The island's population had only recently had their city kingdoms abolished and been unified as a single province under the Ptolemaic Empire. The island was in the process of becoming a resource hub for timber and copper, and was very diverse, with Greek, Phoenician, Etio-Cypriot and other peoples living there. The power base of the Ptolemies on the island was the city of Salamis, near modern-day Famagusta. The governor of the island was Ptolemy's brother Menelaos. Thus, the Antigonids made plans to move from Syria and strike at the base of the island in Salamis. Already in possession of 30 Athenian triremes, Demetrios went to his father in Cilicia. There, his army was enhanced with 10,000 infantry and 5,000 cavalry, and the navy was also enriched with the bottomless personnel of the Near East. It is estimated that at the dawn of the invasion of Cyprus, the Antigonid navy numbered around 180 warships, consisting of 53 heavy warships and around 110 light vessels. Demetrios took the ships and landed on the Carpathia on the northeast of the island. He proceeded to take over.
You know what I really find interesting? I'm glad he mentioned in the beginning that about Antigonus's Macedonian way of fighting and not being seen as weak, because I think so far from watching all these videos, he has been the most aggressive of the Diadochi. He's been the one least willing to play. He's operating through a very conquest mindset, not a diplomatic one, though he has made peace at times. You know, like when he's dealing with other groups, he's very, like, you know, not willing to just play nice or treat even the people he conquers that nice. So I don't know. I think it's interesting that so far it's been him being very aggressive and everyone teaming up to curb his power. Like, yeah, so far he seems like the real big bad of the entire thing, you know? Not, I mean, hard to say any of these people are good or bad. It's like something, I don't know. But you know what I mean, like, yeah, the biggest threat, and everyone is just trying to curb him, because, yeah.
2 local cities, Carpathia and Urania, leaving his ships at the tip of the peninsula. The Antigonids would have to contend with a large defense force. In his garrison at Salamis, Menelaos had 60 warships, alongside 12,000 infantry and 800 cavalry. His strategy was to ensure Demetrios did not reach the city, so he moved out of Salamis and traversed 40 stadia to meet Demetrios in the open field. The tactics that ensued in the battle that followed are unknown to us, but it ultimately ended with the Antigonids triumphing over Menelaos' Ptolemaic host. 1,000 of Menelaos' men were killed and 3,000 were captured, while the remaining troops fled back to Salamis. Demetrios followed them and then put the city under siege. Moreover, the sea was blockaded by the Antigonid ships, trapping the defenders' warships. On land, Demetrios was determined to surpass Alexander's siege of Tyre by using his experience from Munichia. He put forward catapults and 2 battering rams and ordered a siege tower to be built. This siege tower, called the Helipolis, or Destroyer of Cities, was 9 stories high and took a month to be set up. After it was finished, the siege began. Despite the defense of the Salaminians, the walls were broken down as if struck by lightning. However, Salamis and Menelaos were not afraid of lightning, for their city was famous for the shrines to Zeus. That night they broke out of the walls and burnt down the siege engines, giving the city a brief respite. Demetrios had to regroup before going further. In the west of the island, in the city of Paphos, reinforcements arrived for the Ptolemaic defense force in the form of Ptolemy himself. Ptolemy brought with him 140 warships and 10,000 infantry. From there, he sailed on the southern coast, where Aphrodite once rose from the sea, before ending up in Kition. On the way, he received reinforcements from local allies. He sent a message to Menelaos that he should order the ships out of Salamis and sent them to him, as together there would be too many ships for the Antigonid forces to handle. The strategy Ptolemy expected is unclear, but Menelaos likely tried to exploit some gap in the blockade. However, Demetrios found out about this plan through unknown means and decided to go on the offensive before it could happen. He took his siege equipment, as well as all of his elite troops, and boarded them onto his ship. During the night, he placed them in front of Salamis' harbour, enhancing the blockade's strength. The night passed, and when none of Menelaus' ships emerged from the harbour, Ptolemy realised his plans had been compromised. Thus, he decided to attack Demetrios by himself. Ptolemy took his own armada and sailed out of Kition across Cape Pedalion to face Demetrios. The moment Demetrios saw the Ptolemaic fleet, he ordered 10 of his ships to move to the narrow opening of the harbour and continue the blockade, while he moved with the rest of his fleet to face the attack.
Dang, this... we've reached now naval warfare. I have to say, I am impressed by Demetrios. I think we've seen the most growth. We've seen the most growth from him because, we see him as a young, unproven commander and a guy who's had defeats, but also some successes. So it's definitely been interesting seeing Demetrius' growth. And I think this is the same Demetrius from the Pyrrhus of Epirus series, right? Like or is it a different guy? I don't know. Some of these guys have the same name. There are two Ptolemies, But either way, it's been interesting seeing him. And Ptolemy got the better of him before, so though time has passed and Demetrius has gained much more experience, though Ptolemy has ensured that he would have naval strength, so I don't know, I guess we're gonna have to see. I'm not sure who's gonna win, though I might be backing my boy Ptolemy, because again, Ptolemy is my favorite of the Diadochi.
The Antigonid heir put his largest and heaviest ships on his own left flank as a double line, with himself on the front of this line. However, realizing his lack of knowledge about naval affairs, he deferred command to a certain Medios of Larissa, an experienced navarch of the Antigonid navy. The center and right flank were put in a single line. Ptolemy responded with a mirror strategy, putting a double line on his own left wing and a single line on his center and right. Both enemies hoped to break their enemy's right first and surround the other ships. After a tense standoff, Demetrios and Medios dashed forward, with the Antigonid left clashing against the Ptolemaic right. Using the siege engines on the ship, the industrious Demetrios easily pounded the enemy and smashed through them. Ptolemy moved quickly as well, advancing his left flank and breaking through the Antigonid right. Meanwhile, the left flank of Demetrios' ships turned starboard and then proceeded to attack the center line of the enemy. The ships of...
Holy crap, wait a minute. So they're winning here, but if Menelaus breaks through and then joins Ptolemy, they'll have the numerical advantage and jump these guys. Is that what's about to happen?
Menelaus began to power through the ships that were conducting the blockade. Ptolemy turned around to rout the Antigonid center, but realized his own fleet had been routed already. Believing it would be too difficult to fight on, he retreated. By the time Menelaus had successfully broken through the blockade, his brother was already gone. The battle for Salamis ended with a decisive Antigonid victory, with 40 warships and 100 supply ships from the Ptolemaic army.
Dang, dude, Demetrius avenging himself. I didn't expect him to win. I thought Ptolemy would pull out some genius victory. Dang, dude, Antigonus or Demetrius definitely has come a long way, hasn't he? Seeing his growth has just been interesting, I keep saying. So yeah, just seeing that, wow.
Army captured by Demetrios. Menelaus fled from Salamis to Alexandria. Shortly after, the city duly surrendered to...
Okay, various sources mention that Demetrius showed mercy and magnanimity towards his enemies. The enemy dead were said to have been given honored burial, and Menelaus and his retinue were released and allowed to return to Egypt.
Demetrios. 16,000 infantry and 600 cavalry were captured, most of whom joined Demetrios. As for the Antigonid troops, they had minimal losses. Scholars debate the total numbers, but it is likely that only 20 ships were lost. Ptolemy and Menelaus, however, had lost something far more important than the battle. They had lost Cyprus. the island's cities surrendered to Demetrios one by one. Antigonid control over the island was secured for the foreseeable future, providing resources, halloumi, and geographical leeway for the Antigonid dynasty. With Cyprus now firmly in his hands, Antigonos now turned his sights onto Egypt, where he was keen to make gains against Ptolemy, the man who had stolen Alexander's corpse. After receiving his triumphant son, Antigonos broke with the usual rhetoric of protecting the unity of the empire, which by now everyone knew was a farce. Instead, he declared himself king, and named Demetrios both co-king and heir. By doing this, Antigonos made a claim that Alexander's empire belonged to him, and that only he was fit to unify it. The ceremony was elaborate, and caused a domino effect of royal declarations. The multitude then, for the first time, proclaimed Antigonos and Demetrius kings. Antigonus's friends tied at once a diadem round his head, while Demetrius was sent a diadem by his father, and addressed as king in a letter he wrote. When the news was reported, Ptolemy's followers in Egypt also proclaimed Ptolemy king, to dispel any impression that his defeat had humbled his pride. And so emulation spread the practice like a contagion among the Diadochi. Lysimachus began to wear the diadem, and so too did Seleucus in his dealings with the Greeks. As with the barbarians, he had already been behaving as a king. Cassander, however, although the others wrote to him and addressed him as king, continued to write letters in the same style as before, with his name only, but no title.
Dang, now it's like the pretext of, yeah, the empire ain't unifying, we're just kings of our own right, so that's so cool to see that. And again, Antigonus has been quite the threat this entire series. Like, he has been a real big player, like almost a big player in a sense, in that everyone's usually either fighting him or rallying to fight him. Like, he's very dangerous, I find.
The presence of the friends of Antigonos at his coronation was important. Macedonian and later Hellenistic kingship relied on the Phili Basileos, the friends of the king, as a trusted inner circle of administrators. This was the case for Alexander, and it would be the case for their descendants and heirs. It should be noted that Cassander did not also declare himself king, probably.
Plutarch's note on Seleucus only acting royalty were barbarians is debatable, given Seleucus was claiming dreams and oracles where he was granted royal titles. It may indicate some anti-Oriental sentiment.
Because his marriage to Thessaloniki, Alexander's sister, gave him enough legitimacy. Nevertheless, Antigonos's coronation marked a turning point that hastened the war, because now all main actors wanted to be kings of either their respective spheres of influence or the entire empire. The empire was now officially divided, and if it were to reunite, it would be under a new dynasty. Antigonos and Demetrios now had an incredible opportunity. Ptolemy was at a disadvantage, and that meant he was vulnerable. Thus, father and son began to march south for an invasion of Egypt. Antigonos levied 90,000 men on land at his capital, while Demetrios got his ships and set sail. The two sections of the military travelled down south from Asia Minor through the Levant towards Egypt. The border at Gaza was crossed, and Demetrios tried at once to march to the Nile Delta. However, the march was difficult due to the desert landscape, as well as the constant harassment by the old enemies of the Antigonids, the Nabateans, who remembered their previous confrontations in Petra. Eventually, they reached Pelusium, only to find Ptolemy across the river with troops ready to fight them off. Antigonos ordered Demetrios to conduct a landing and make them a bridgehead. Demetrios tried to do so with his best troops twice, once at Pseudonostum and once more at Vatniticum. Both times he was pushed back by Ptolemy. Antigonos considered his options. Attempting to cross the Nile via other means would mean risking failure like Perdiccas.
Yeah, as we know, Ptolemy is great at defensive warfare, so again, like, as he defeated the regent of Alexander in the First War, you know, they're in for an uphill battle, because Ptolemy, is just really great at defensive warfare.
Yes, possibly with equally fatal consequences. Thus, he ordered his troops to retreat, and moved back to Antigonia. However, this was not to be the end of the war. Demetrios and Antigonos may have ruled Asia Minor and the Levant, but there was a small island that was both neutral and friendly with Ptolemy, the rose of the Dodecanese, Rhodes. Antigonos ordered Demetrios to set sail and conquer the island. Demetrios, who remembered the Rhodians rebuking him, mustered his troops and did so, and it was a choice that would define his very name and bring forth his most infamous title. Throughout the Fourth War of the Diadochi, the Antigonids showed that they would not go down without a fight. With his victory at Salamis, Demetrios had shown that he could bounce back from his previous failures and secure areas for his father's control. In a world where empires rose and fell like ephemeral butterflies, Demetrios and Antigonos wanted theirs to last forever. Ptolemy, Cassander, Lysimachos and Seleucus also wanted to become immortalized in their dynasties. The struggle was bound to continue even after the Antigonid victory at Salamis. The Fourth War of the Diadochi will thus continue at sea, and many, many more battles will be fought to end it. The Eastern Mediterranean will tremble from the marches of horizon-spanning armies and endless naval armadas. To paraphrase the Italian politician Antonio Gramsci, the classical and Achaemenid worlds are dying, and the Hellenistic world struggles to be born. Now is the time of kings and generals. The city of Rhodes was both a suitable and an unorthodox target for the Antigonids to go after. According to Diadoros Sikelos, it was a very stable and prosperous polis, which was a very important benefit in a very unstable world. This meant that all of the various Diadochi wished to gain control over this rich hub. However, the Rhodians themselves were reluctant to pick a side, and it was in their economic interest to be friends with all but allied with none. With that said, the Rhodians did show slight favor to their biggest trading partner, the Ptolemies. This meant they were prone to avoid open alliances with their enemies, which is why they had.
The Rhodians wished to maintain their neutrality precisely for this reason, while the sympathized the most with Ptolemy. It was important to be able to trade with all. This benefited with the Ptolemies with trade booms from the Rhodians.
Denied assistance to Demetrios for the Battle of Salamis in our previous episode. Demetrios thus wanted to take control of this vital nexus point, and by doing so, gain more leverage against Ptolemy. By taking control of the island that was the gateway to the Aegean, and establishing a base of operations upon it, he could dominate the Eastern Mediterranean. It was thus a pragmatic choice, though it would cost him in infamy, as attacking the neutral mercantile city made him look like a common pirate to most of the Hellenic city-states. At the port of Lorima, the Antigonid army began assembling under Demetrios. 200 warships were amassed, many pimped up with artillery machines. Additionally, 170 supply ships were loaded up for the over 40,000 troops enlisted to besiege the island city. Diadoros Sikelos claims, perhaps spuriously, that 1,000 smaller pirate ships gathered up behind the Antigonid fleet, waiting like vultures to take advantage of the destruction of Rhodes. Some of these pirates were hired by Demetrios to serve as light raiders. With his army gathered, Demetrios set sail for Rhodes. When news of this reached the Rhodians, they assembled 6,000 of their citizens, 10,000 metics, and an unidentified number of their enslaved population. Their defense force assembled, there was nothing to do but wait until the Antigonid army appeared. When Demetrios' navy arrived upon the island, they blockaded the port of Rhodes completely, while his troops made landfall in the southwest plains. After this, Demetrios sent the pirates to conduct raids across the island, to both irritate and cause damage to the Rhodian population. The Rhodians tried to negotiate at first, but these attempts at diplomacy were fruitless, so they resolved to fight. In a bold move, 3 Rhodian ships broke out from their well-fortified harbour, sank a few of the Antigonid ships, and dashed back to their harbour triumphant. Rhodian craftsmanship had already shown itself to be invaluable. The blockade was never fully successful, as Ptolemaic-funded supplies continued to enter Rhodes, meaning that Rhodes was not alone in its hour of need. The diplomatic connections of the Rhodians further paid off when they sent envoys to Cassander and Lysimachos.
And motorcycle mechanics.
Doubling down on the blockade, Demetrius built another harbour alongside a wave breaker to make sure his ships would be secure. Moreover, he loaded up his smaller ships with small artillery and Cretan archers for quick attacks on the Rhodians. He then constructed 2 big platforms on top of 4 warships, united in 2 pairs, and then put his catapults on top of said platforms. He did the same with siege towers on top of platforms strapped on supply ships, thereby building a mobile amphibious siege arsenal.
Dang, that's cool. That's actually really unique. Like, I kinda like that little innovation there. Granted, you have to really defend them, because if they get jumped, but still, that's interesting.
Rhodians responded by mounting their own artillery on their ships, harbour, walls, and mole. With the preparations and the standoff completed, and after bad weather thwarted an initial attack, the battle officially began. Demetrios began his assault at nightfall by sending 500 men to drive at the mole before establishing a beachhead. Leaving 400 men to secure control of the site, he waited until the next morning and then towed his large artillery-mounted ships into the harbour and commenced a projectile assault. The Rhodians weathered this storm with great heroism, returning fire with stubborn resistance. Rhodes suffered heavy losses, but they withstood for the duration of the assault. The Antagonids eventually withdrew, and the Rhodians tried to chase after them and burn the retreating armada, but to no avail. Soon Demetrios regrouped his forces, turned back, and recommenced his assault. This time, through the use of amphibious landings, they established a foothold on the walls. However, the Antigonid forces were eventually repulsed once more. The following week was quiet, as the Rhodians buried their dead, and Demetrios regrouped and reorganized his forces. Demetrios' next move was to escalate the pressure on the defenders with a 2-pronged strategy. He took his light ships, full of archers, moved them into close proximity to the defenders' base, and then began to shoot flaming projectiles at the defenders on the Rhodian ships. This was meant to burn the enemy ships and cripple their naval defenses. Simultaneously, Demetrios ordered the catapults and artillery to attack the walls, while striking at the enemies on the front ramparts. Soon the walls began to break down, like those of Jericho in the Hebrew Bible, but the sailors on the ships managed to save their vessels from being completely burned. The fate of Rhodes now teetered on a knife's edge, so the defenders resorted to desperate tactics. They took 2 of their light vessels and made a suicide run towards the siege engine warships, managing to ram and destroy the enemy vessels, sacrificing themselves for the future of their polis, a noble deed equal to that of the 300. However, 2 engines managed to escape, while the remaining Rhodians were surrounded and captured. Nevertheless, this attack was ultimately successful, for it did enough damage to force Demetrios to retreat. Shortly after, a fierce storm churned up, giving the Rhodians even more breathing room. Consequently, they moved down the mole and destroyed the outpost and the Antigonid troops within, breaking the landing from one side of the island. Soon after, Ptolemaic aid, in the form of 650 troops, entered through the blockade, reinforcing the defenders. As 304 BCE rolled around and Demetrios turned 32 years old, the king of Asia resolved to do one more land assault. Possibly using the remnants from Salamis, he ordered another construction of a helipolis, a giant siege tower. This tower was larger than the ones he had built before, and was reinforced with iron front plates to avoid fire attacks.
Holy crap. Yeah, this is interesting. I didn't expect the Rhodians to put up such a great fight, but man, they are going for it, guys.
With this monumental achievement in ancient engineering, it was here that Demetrios truly became Polioketes, the besieger of cities. During the construction of the helipolis, the Rhodians scrambled to construct a second wall and reinforce their defences, while also sending their ships to attack enemy supply lines at sea. Multiple ramming assaults took place during the winter, resulting in the Rhodians securing supplies in the form of grain. As this was happening, Demetrios decided to play with fire. He took his team of sappers and began to construct tunnels underneath the outer walls. Upon realizing what was happening, the Rhodians began to dig their own counter-tunnels. As the battle was raging on top, the 2 tunnels ended up burrowing up against each other and an underground battle ensued. Meanwhile...
Okay, that's kind of cool, yeah. I have to give it to Demetrius, man. He has grown quite a lot, and I'm kind of impressed by him. You know?
Demetrios prepared for the ramming assault. He cleared the way for the Heliopolis, while also building up penthouses for his men to hide in while using battering rams. At some point during this siege, the Rhodians stockpiled their Ptolemaic-supplied ordnance, waited for a dark, moonless night to cover their movements from the enemy, and then barraged the Heliopolis, damaging it severely but not fully disabling it. Some Athenians in the city tried to negotiate with Demetrios under a man called Athenagoras. Demetrios sent a man named Alexander the Macedonian to meet Athenagoras as a pretext to infiltrate the city, but the Athenian informed the Rhodians of this, who killed him on the spot. The catapults rained stones as the rams approached like massive boars, and the Heliopolis slowly moved forward by the force of 3,400 soldiers. Eventually, the combined assault collapsed the walls, which came crashing down and caused a Rhodian retreat. The victorious Antigonids passed through, coming face to face with the recently constructed inner walls. In order to break through the inner walls, Demetrius placed his most skilled general, Alkimos, in charge of 1,500 of his most elite troops and ordered them to conduct a night raid on the city. That night, Alkimos and the elite troops broke through into the city and moved inwards with relative ease, confident in their victory. However, as soon as they reached the theatre, the Rhodian defenders descended upon them with the vicious fury of men defending their hometown. After a long and bloody battle, all of the Antigonid troops were either dead or captured. The siege resumed as previously, with Demetrios growing angrier and more impatient than ever. It was here that a message was delivered to him. It was from Antigonos, who was fearful that the dragging out of the siege of Rhodes was severely damaging the Antigonids' reputation. Because of this, Antigonos ordered Demetrios to lift the siege. Despite still having a lot of resources at his disposal, Demetrios begrudgingly accepted and entered into negotiations with the Rhodians. The following settlement was reached. 1. Rhodes would be an autonomous and demilitarized city. 2. Rhodes would be exempt from tribute and continue trade freely. 3. Rhodes was to become an Antigonid ally except against Ptolemy. 4. 100 citizens were to be sent as hostages. With the deal secured, Demetrios sailed away, not defeated, but repelled by a twist of geopolitics. Nevertheless,
yeah, it seems like politics really saved the Rhodians, but still, again, they were pulling up an impressive victory there. Like, I really felt like, man, they were putting up great resistance, I feel.
Yes, the Rhodians had defended their homes valiantly despite heavy losses. In the end, the Antigonids did not manage to conquer Rhodes, which was a major propaganda victory for the anti-Antigonid coalition. For the Rhodians, it was a massive success. According to Diadoros Sikelos, the victorious islanders liberated all the enslaved peoples who had fought by their side, as promised. They also built statues of Cassander and Lysimachos in their city. The most important honor, however, was saved for Ptolemy. The Rhodians sent their envoys to the Oracle of Amun, where Alexander was declared the son of Zeus, and asked about it possibly deifying Ptolemy. The oracle gave their blessing, and a large square in the city called Ptolemaium was constructed, a mass complex where Ptolemy was worshipped as a god. This was not an uncommon practice. Indeed, Demetrios was also called a god by the Athenians. The other major legacy of the Siege of Rhodes was architecture, resulting in the construction of one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. To commemorate their victory, the Rhodians decided to honor their patron deity, the god of the sun, Helios.
Oh, that's cool. I know that statue. What's it called? Crap, how do I not remember the name? Colossus. That's it. The Colossus of Rhodes.
Selling the Antigonid equipment left on their island for 300 talents, they instructed a local Rhodian, Chares of Lindos, to construct a massive statue on the site of the harbour. This statue was the famous Colossus of Rhodes, which stood at 33 meters tall. The statue greeted people in the harbour. It was a testament to the power of the sun and a monument for the Rhodians who had fought during their city's finest hour. And what of Demetrios? He was instructed to leave not just for the propaganda issues the siege was causing, but also because the political situation on the Greek mainland was changing. As we will remember from our last episode, many Greek city-states, like Athens, had aligned with the Antigonids, who claimed to be defending Hellenic freedom from the Macedonian garrisons. However, in retribution for this, Cassander laid siege to the city. This attack was going very badly for Athens, but the news of Demetrios making a landing at Chalkis in northern Attica caused Cassander to reconsider and conduct an orderly retreat. He began to move back towards Macedon, with Demetrios hot on his tail. The two armies ended up meeting in the Kallidromon mountain pass, where, after a battle, 6,000 Macedonians defected to join the cause of the ascendant Polyoketes. Cassander fled with his remaining troops, and his authority in Greece was now on shaky grounds.
Find the lowest priced health.
After this victory, Demetrios turned around and decided to secure his control over southern Greece. He moved down to the Peloponnese, where major Ptolemaic and Cassandrian garrisons were placed, and ordered a full-scale invasion of the Peloponnese. He expelled the enemy troops and then declared the freedom of all Hellenic polis. He was also declared commander of the Hellenes, invoking the pan-Hellenic ideal that Philip and Alexander utilized for their own control over Greece. Everyone to the south of Macedon, except for the ever-isolationist Spartans, accepted him. Demetrios also married a local Molossian princess, Diadochi, securing an alliance between Epiros and the Antigonids. Still licking his wounds, Cassander tried to negotiate for peace with Antigonos, but the one-eyed general demanded that he surrender completely. When the Antigonid reply reached Cassander in 303 BCE, he refused and called on Lysimachos, who was finally free of Thracian attacks. Lysimachos met with Cassander at Pella, and they both sent envoys to Ptolemy and Seleucus to strengthen the dynastic alliance against the combined Hellenic and Asiatic forces of the two savior gods. Ptolemy accepted the messengers in Alexandria, gleefully obliged the plea for help, and began to prepare for an invasion of Sidon. But the envoys who were meant for Babylon arrived at an inopportune time, for Seleucus was in the east, and thus had to travel further east to reach him. Thus, the alliance against Antigonos was coming together, but it would take some time to be fully formed. However, when it did, it would make all of the eastern Mediterranean tremble. With the failure of the siege of Rhodes and the completion of the Colossus, the sun had finally set on one of the Antigonids' greatest military fumbles. Nevertheless, the Antigonid kingdom remained strong, still spanning all of Syria and Anatolia. However, their enemies were ready for their vengeance. The final battle of the Fourth War of the Diadochi was looming over the horizon, and it is this battle that will shift the fate of the Hellenistic world.
Again, so much of the Diadochi wars have just been everyone fighting Antigonus. I kind of find that's like a big thread. So yeah, we are in the Battle of Ipsus, the big final showdown, right? That settles everything. Wow. Oh, snap.
The pharaoh of Egypt, Ptolemy, accepted the envoys coming from the west sent by Lysimachos and Cassander, but Seleucus was not in his capital of Babylon to receive his, for he was off campaigning in the Orient. Seleucus's conquest of the eastern satrapies is little known, but we can surmise that he probably managed to subdue most of Persia, as well as Bactria and Hyrcania. He probably fought a war against Scythian tribes, but the most important of Seleucus's wars was to be fought further east, against a man who would prove to be his equal. That man was the king of Magadha and the founder of the famous Maurya Empire of India, Chandragupta Maurya.
Oh, I've heard of Chandragupta. I'm sorry, but I've heard of him, and I've heard of like he's renowned. I haven't ever looked too deep into him, but obviously I've heard of his name. Wow, is he around this time? Dang, and he was beefing with a Diadochi? That's pretty cool. I would like to see a video based on what the heck was going on here.
Chandragupta had recently overthrown the last king of the kingdom of Nanda.
Some Greek sources claim that Chandragupta met Alexander the Great, but we know little else to test if such claims were reliable. The Chronicle of Mahavsma from Sri Lanka claims that he was a warrior caste, and from the Shaika clan, the same as the Buddha Gautama. Huh.
and had accumulated power from the eastern parts of India across the Gangetic Plains and the northwest of the subcontinent. The obscure but possibly titanic Seleucid-Mauryan War lasted from 305 to 303 BCE, and its results are unclear. We know nothing of the campaigns or where they took place, though it is likely the Seleucids crossed the Hindu Kush and were stuck there for the majority of the conflict. No accounts of the battles of this war survive, so anything from Seleucus and Chandragupta fighting in a Greek versus Indian wrestling match, to Megarian, Aristotelian and Platonist philosophers having a mass debate against Buddhists, Jains and Ajivikas are possible. The most likely and disappointing scenario, however, is that the Greeks and Indians merely engaged in multiple bloody and probably indecisive battles. Most historians agree that Seleucus lost this war, resulting in a peace treaty where one of Seleucus's daughters was married to Chandragupta in exchange for the Indian king providing the Macedonian Diadochos with 500 war elephants. Moreover, the Hindu Kush became an unofficial border between the Seleucid and Maurya nations, with the region of Gandhara coming under Mauryan control. Seleucus would later send an ambassador, Megasthenes, to the Mauryan court, and his fragmentary records provide a small insight into Mauryan life and India in general. These two titans of antiquity, one ruling Persia and the other India, thus proved to be more than a match for each other. Armed with his new elephants, and having heard of the news from Cassander's envoys, Seleucus went west to organize and fight Antigonos once more. While Seleucus was on the move, Cassander decided to stay in Greece to guard the southern frontiers of Macedon against Demetrios. Cassander's best general, Pripylos, joined forces with Lysimachos in Byzantium, from where the two commenced a surprise attack into Antigonid territory in Asia Minor. Antigonos heard of this news and amassed his troops. He departed Antigonia, arriving in Asia Minor in 303 BCE and engaging Lysimachos in a stalking game across the northwest of the region. However, the latter eluded the Antigonid until winter, when both armies stopped to endure the cold weather. In the south and the east, two new events unfolded. In the south, Ptolemy had entered Phoenicia by sea and land and began a little attested siege of the city of Astarte, Sidon. In the east, Seleucus appeared from the lands of Ahura Mazda and, in a lightning bolt march, united with Lysimachos. While Ptolemy retreated after hearing rumors that Lysimachos and Seleucus had been defeated, Antigonos got wind of the arrival of Seleucus and immediately asked Demetrios to come to his aid. The besieger obliged and travelled across the Aegean, powering through the region and recapturing coastal cities on his way to meet his father at Kyllene. Father and son then met and marched forth to face their enemies. After maneuvers that we sadly know little about, the two armies met at Ipsus in Phrygia in 301 BCE. The time had finally come to see who was the greatest general. Before long, the generals entered the battlefield.
There's Pyrrhus there. We watched the Pyrrhus of Epirus series last year, so I do know Pyrrhus was in the battle. And I do know that, Antigonus loses. A little disappointing Ptolemy ain't there for this climactic showdown, but oh well. So yeah, there's Pyrrhus. Oh man, I love the Pyrrhus. Oddly enough, from last year, the Pyrrhus series was actually my favorite. Because, I don't know, I just really, really liked Pyrrhus of Epirus. I even read Plutarch's entire telling of his life. Just, a very interesting man in life. I really like Pyrrhus of Epirus.
Which was located somewhere around Ipsus. The Antigonids had amassed 70,000 infantry, mainly of the heavy type. Placing them in the center alongside mercenaries, Antigonos put his son Demetrios on the right wing, alongside 5,000 cavalry and a certain Pyrrhus of Epiros, who later would immortalize himself by invading a fledgling Roman Empire and coining the term Pyrrhic victory through his extremely costly triumphs. The one-eyed general moved to the left flank alongside 5,000 more cavalry, while placing 75 elephants and light infantry in alternating positions in front of the center. Seleucus and Lysimachos placed their heavy infantry of 64,000 in the center, combining both Greek and Asian troops from all over the Seleucid realm. 7,500 cavalry were deployed both on the right and left flanks of their army, while Seleucus put some of his elephants at the front. The rest of the elephants were left behind as a reserve force. Interestingly, Seleucus had brought his 23-year-old son, Antiochus, alongside him to fight in the left wing of the Macedonian cavalry. The elephants on both sides released a deafening trumpeting din as they both began to charge forward. The infantry in the center of both alliances pushed behind them in slow, methodical movements. Demetrios took the initiative on the right wing and charged forward towards the enemy cavalry. It proved to be a quick fight, with Antiochus forced to retreat with Demetrios behind him. Thereafter, both cavalry formations left the battlefield. Meanwhile, the cavalry...
Dang, that was wild. Just all over the place. Imagine seeing this battle. Like, this must have been insane to have witnessed in person. And yet Demetrius and Pyrrhus are almost routing the left of the coalition.
Cavalry on the other side of the battlefield had also engaged, but in the center, the Antigonid infantry had managed to inflict heavy losses on the Seleucid Lysimachian middle. Demetrios continued chasing Antiochus, but eventually turned around to attack Seleucus from behind. However, Seleucus was not to be so easily defeated. He ordered his reserve elephants to move into position, which they did, blocking the path of the besieger. Try as he might, Demetrios could not get around the elephants. Then Seleucus took the light cavalry and ordered them to move around the center formation and move onto the right flank of the Antigonid infantry, where Antigonos had been exposed after Demetrios' assault on the right. Now the
Wow, big brain move. Seleucus ensuring, his left was broken, but now in this rout, he uses all his reserved elephants to keep Demetrius at bay, and now creating a new, and then moving through the now exposed left and Antigonus' right. Wow.
light cavalry moved to fill that gap. They raised their javelins and threw them at the heavy infantry, which soon began to collapse. Pushing through the now chaotic center, Seleucus moved to the left, where Antigonos was with his cavalry. Despite the difficult situation he was in, Antigonos remained in the field of battle, never retreating and remaining hopeful that his son would return and help him. Thus, he perished in the place he'd spent most of his life, on the battlefield, as a field of javelins struck both him and his faithful companions. Antigonos was a truly ambitious man, skilled in the art of war, and managed to survive facing overwhelming odds.
Dude, Antigonus was basically the nightmare for the rest of the Diadochi. They all constantly teamed up to fight him. Like, he was the biggest menace of the entire era. Like, a true terror to behold. It's kind of odd to just see him gone now, but GG, man.
He tried to reunite Alexander's empire at the age of 80 years old, and he had nearly achieved this goal many times. He also had a living legacy, his son Demetrios, who had proven himself to his father many times over. When Demetrios realized his father had perished, he retreated from the battlefield and the Battle of Ipsus ended.
Have you or your loved ones been impacted by the...
The Battle of Ipsus marked the official end of the Wars of the Diadochi, though the true end would come a few decades later, with the end of the first generation of dynasts. Antigonos' death was an important turning point. He had conducted some of the early Hellenistic state-building practices, like founding cities, settling Greeks, and engaging with local rulers. While some of the surviving ancient sources are hostile towards the Antigonids, many modern scholars, like Richard Billows, have shown that he was, in fact, not just power-hungry, but keen on statecraft. After his death on the battlefield, Antigonos' body was sent to Demetrios, who gave his beloved father a royal burial worthy of the Lord of Asia. Now his empire was to be divided amongst the victors. Lysimachus, who was too busy with raids and internal Adrician revolts in his kingdom for most of the duration of the wars, now received most of Asia Minor. Seleucus took what is today's Syria and Kurdistan, while Ptolemy took Palestine. This left out a few small regions, which were nonetheless strategically important. These included Cyprus, some Aegean islands, and southern Greece. It is noteworthy that Cassander got very little in terms of spoils, because while defeated, Demetrios still had sway over the Greek polis. His brother, Pleistarchos, did receive parts of Cilicia that were under allied control. However, the Antipatриds were not left to be alone by the gadfly that was Demetrios the besieger. The Antigonid king had fled to Ephesus, and then most likely to Cyprus, before trying to go back to Athens. Up until now, Athens had been glad to be in alliance with Demetrios, the man who had restored democracy in their city. However, Athenian support for the man was starting to wane, for after the partition of the Antigonid realm, the merchants of the city had now lost access to supplies from Asia Minor. Thus, according to Plutarch, they sent him a delegation to say he was not to be allowed back. Demetrios instead settled in Delos and began to organize once more. Having moved back to Greece and secured his control of the region once more, he began to conduct raids against Lysimachos, eventually achieving a hold over the Asia Minor coast. Demetrios became strong enough to be considered for various martial alliances that the successors would become known for. One of these alliances came from Seleucus, who now owned the heartland of his father's former possessions. Seleucus had an issue with Ptolemy's presence in Palestine and Phoenicia, so the Greek pharaoh and the Hellenic Shahanshah broke off their diplomatic relations. This was a schism that the besieger sought to exploit. The dating is unclear, but it was likely in 299 BCE that Demetrios sent his daughter, Stratonike, who was named after Demetrios' own mother, to become one of the wives of Seleucus. Later, Seleucus passed Stratonike on to his son Antiochos. This political marriage signaled that Demetrios was still strong, and that Seleucus no.
Again, I admire Demetrius at how he's just been around since like the beginning, and he's grown from inexperience, taking L's, to becoming this like very skilled man in his own right. Like, you have to give it to him. He does not go down, man.
No longer saw him as a mortal enemy. Demetrios' other wife, Diadochi, had also died of illness, so his alliance with Pyrrhos was beginning to lose ground. As Seleucus began to form yet another phase of independent foreign policy, Ptolemy sought to maintain an alliance with the now closely bound Lysimachos and Cassander. Thus, the former sent two of his daughters to marry Lysimachos and his son and heir Agathocles. We must remember when discussing this that Macedonian kings practiced polygyny, the custom of marrying multiple women. So, for instance, Seleucus' wife Apama could have stuck around if she was still alive, though scholars debate whether this was the case. As alliances were being brokered, Demetrios began to raid into Ptolemaic territory. Eventually, overtures began to be made for a possible marriage alliance with Ptolemy, only to be ratified a decade later. As Hellenistic alliances were prone to shift, Demetrios and Seleucus soon began not to see eye to eye, possibly because it was seen as a short-term alliance. However, the boost to the besieger was enough for him to take advantage of a major event. In 297 BCE, Cassander died of dropsy, likely because of a sustained equine lifestyle. The man known for both his cunning in ascending to the Macedonian throne and for killing the most members of Alexander's family had perished. The key to Cassander's successes had been his ability to forge alliances and survive against difficult odds, much like his rival Demetrios. Cassander had three sons, Philip IV, Antipater I, and Alexander V, all born by the last survivor of the Argead dynasty, Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki initially seems to have remained influential, but soon her sons started to bicker over who would rule. Philip ruled briefly as the eldest heir, but died soon after. Following his passing, Antipater, the middle son, began to argue with the youngest sibling, Alexander V, over the succession. In 295 BCE, Antipater murdered his mother Thessaloniki, the sister of Alexander the Great. The reason for this matricide is unclear, but Thessaloniki had been ruling as regent in the wake of her husband's death, and thus may have had influence in the court that Antipater wanted to avoid. The last of Alexander the Great's siblings was now dead. Thessaloniki had lived to see her whole family perish, but was also ambitious herself, ruling alongside Cassander. She was thus as shrewd as her husband and her siblings, and is remembered today as the namesake of the second largest city in Greece, and for the legends of her as a mermaid who still lives, seeking her brother across the seas. A civil conflict.
Dang. And that's kind of it for Alexander's main family. Crap, dude. Very tragic story in between all this warfare, you know. Meanwhile, Rome's over there, just wait, guys. We're gonna conquer all of you. Keep struggling, please. So the point is, kind of tragic. Kind of like brings my mood down a bit hearing about it, you know.
emerged in the heartland of Macedon between the two princes, and Alexander V decided to do something rather unexpected. As Antipater was betting on being allied to Lysimachos and his Thracian troops, the youngest son invited Demetrios, the man whose dynasty his family had fought against, to come to Macedon and assist him. Demetrios was more than happy to oblige and enter this conflict by beginning a march to Macedon. However, he was not just doing this to help Alexander, but to ensure he himself would rule. In 294 BCE, in the city of Larissa, Demetrios proclaimed himself king in front of his troops. He had the legitimacy to do this through his first wife, the Macedonian daughter of Antipater, Phila, mother of both Stratonike, the wife of Seleucus, and the heir to Demetrios, Antigonos II Gonatas. He moved to Pella, took the region with relative ease, and then proceeded to murder Alexander V. Following this, Antipater I fled to Thrace and into the arms of Lysimachos, where he would be murdered years later. As all of the Diadochi were in general peace at the time, and as the Macedonians had grown dissatisfied with the bickering Antipatrids, they all accepted the kingship of Demetrios. This was to be the first of the Antigonid kings to rule over Macedon for a century. But Demetrios was not ready to stop there. He immediately began preparations to march down south once again, and, like the lightning bolt of Zeus, strike at the polis of Hellas that had dared to defy him. The death of Antigonos spelled the end of the Antigonid Empire in Asia Minor, which was now divided between Lysimachos, Ptolemy, and Seleucus. Cassander was secure in his position in Macedon until his death. The Fourth War of the Diadochi had ended with the defeat of one of the most powerful armies in both Europe and Asia. However, there are still a few loose ends to tie up. One of them is Demetrios, who was still at large and would not give up on his dynastic dreams. The other will be rather unexpected, but will revolve around the phantom of the successors, Lysimachos. This successor will find himself in an unexpected situation, as his neighborhoods, Asia Minor and Macedon, will become more unstable as the century turns. This turmoil will bring him into contact with Epirot kings like Pyrrhus, and will have him face off against Seleucus, who now wished to become the new Antigonos.
Alright, so wait. So yeah guys, I'm gonna end the video right here. That's the end of the Fourth Diadochi War, but there's still things to cover like the succession crisis, the Gallic invasion, and the Ptolemaic Seleucid Syrian wars, which we'll be covering in the next few days. So until then, bye everyone.